Today, we're going to be discussing the importance of advocating for yourself, both when it comes to getting accommodations and treatment, not just for ADHD, but for anything you might need. And you also might be noticing something very different about Cass and I today is that we have these silly things on our heads. Why is that, you ask? It's because we're very excited to say that we have our very first guest all the way from the UK. Everybody, please welcome Sean from New Me Therapy. Say hi, Sean.
Hi.
Very talkative, this guy. This is Fuck the Plan, the ADHD Project podcast. I'm Aaron.
I'm Cass.
And we have with us Sean today from New Me Therapy. So Sean and I connected a little while back. He reached out as a fan of the show and also because he has ADHD himself. I won't tell his story for you. I'll let him do that. But we connected for a little bit over some of the experiences that we've had in life and some of the things that we're working on. Sean's been working on some brilliant reform efforts, in my mind, that I haven't really seen over here stateside going on in the UK. So I'm really excited to get a chance to discuss that. And in general, kind of tying in with the theme of self-advocacy and knowing when and how to be able to advocate for yourself to get the accommodations that you need. So, Sean, before we get into it, tell us a little bit and tell the viewers a little bit about your story, kind of what brought you from, where you started to your therapy career today, and a little bit about what you've been working on with reform efforts.
Okay. I'll start from even before I was born. The reason why I will start from before I was born is because we talk about the root causes of ADHD and where it comes from. So I like to start before I was born, first of all. So I was born from two parents that came from Ireland. They moved to London in the 60s. They were both smokers and drinkers, very stressed individuals in a time in the UK where the Irish struggled with the troubles in Ireland. So there was issues around, being seen as terrorists and so on. So there was lots of struggles growing up in a very early age. I was born with an older brother, younger sister. We came into this world where my dad was already very ill, had issues with drinking and smoking, as did my mum. I believe that she smoked and drank through pregnancy. My dad died when we were infants, which left a very stressed, aggressive, abusive parent that couldn't cope. So, when I look in my past, I believe my dad had issues, my mum had issues. Then through the childhood years, there were struggles. I had meningitis. I was taken away from my mum from a very young age as an infant for 2 weeks with no connection. She was at home. I was left in an incubator.
Wow.
I went through my school years, very troubled, very hard to focus and concentrate, always in trouble, very disruptive. And where I struggled in school with education in particular, where I found it very difficult to connect with either the teacher or the subject, I would then become the naughty boy because I'd rather be the naughty boy than the stupid boy.
Right.
Because if I struggled with education and I struggled with learning, and we say that if a child can't learn the way we teach, then maybe we should teach the child the way they wish to learn.
Right.
Now I struggled with the way they communicated with me, so therefore I fell behind more and more. So therefore, rather than being a dumb kid, I want to be a naughty kid.
Right.
So through school years, I was always in trouble, and all this stuff progressed and progressed. Got to my teen years, all of a sudden I've become a very wild adolescent. All of a sudden education wasn't important to me, so I got involved in drink and drugs and in trouble with the police and driving and all the things that come with that. Struggled to get into work, got into my 20s. My first job actually was the first nursery teacher in London, which was a male, because I wanted to connect with children. I liked the curiosity, the fun, the excitement, the novelty, the stimulation. So I love that kind of work, but it never paid me enough money. So on the weekends, I worked in nightclubs. Again, that kind of chaotic, dysfunctional kind of environment, which stimulated my mind. It was giving me the dopamine that I didn't think I even knew about back then. Through these years, I was going in and out of relationships, had making money, losing money. You're ticking all the boxes for ADHD traits. Until the point where I was, by this time, living in abroad, running nightclubs, married with 2 kids. Marriage was a mess. I failed as a husband because I wasn't doing the things I was meant to be doing because I was out just drinking and drugs and everything else. And I realized that after that relationship, we decided to come to an end with that, which is very traumatic for me. And I know that with my children growing up, I look back now, I can see where things have happened for them as well because they've got ADHD as well. But I realized that I need to change because all these times through my life, I kept making the same mistakes. I wasn't learning from hindsight. I didn't have any foresight to see the consequences. And now I realized that this is ADHD.
Right.
And I kept asking myself the question time and time again. Every time I was upset with myself or disappointed, kept asking myself the question, what's wrong with me? Why do I keep doing the same things over and over again? Why am I different? Then I realized by doing my own work, self-discovery and self-improvement, I realized the question shouldn't have been what's wrong with me. The question should have been what happened to me? What
Right.
happened to me to change the way I think, how I feel, and how I behave about myself and the people around me? So that was my dive into learning. This is when 10 years ago I was learning more about ADHD.
Right.
And then with ADHD, when you kind of hyper focus on something you're interested in,
Hmm.
all of a sudden I dived in more and more about myself. Then I wanted to go into the world of therapy because even by this time I was living back in London, and I had I went into finance, then I moved into into technology, and both of those industries were very interesting for me. But again, once I kind of reached the pinnacle, I got bored.
Right.
So again, I was jumping from career to career. Um, but all the time I was studying psychology, understanding all things to do with psychotherapy and behavior, human behavior in particular. And for me, it was all about learning more about myself so I can help other people.
Right.
So for years now, I've been a specialist ADHD therapist and coach. I'm also now a certified brain health professional, which means I can now read brain scans and I can tell you the different types of ADHD that exist and how we can manage them from not only from a medication perspective, but from supplementation, from diet, exercise, sleep, because they all go hand in hand. They're all holistic in some way. And the reason why I'm telling you this story is because when I look back at my life and we talk about the causes, is it genetics? Is it epigenetics? Is it a child that was mother was drinking through pregnancy or smoking cigarettes or environmental toxins? Or was there a brain injury from my meningitis? Or was there this neglect and trauma from being abandoned as a child felt by the mum not being around? All these factors, it could be any of these things. But for me, it doesn't matter.
Right.
For me, it's about where I am now in my life. And for me, it's like, what can I do now to improve my life? So I've set my own protocols to learn what I need to do myself, which includes, just reducing stimulation around me, calming down the nervous system. So for me, it's about improving sleep, diet, exercise, especially diet supplementation is really important, especially connection as well. And I see my children growing up now, I can see the traits, and they've actually got different types as well. So we've got the combined, we've got the inattentive. So I'm seeing this all the time. I have clients every day. I've seen hundreds of ADHD clients, and I can tell you now there is a broad spectrum.
Right.
We've got the very hyperactive, stimulated, impulsive ones, and then we've got the really low mood, anxious, procrastinating, low motivation. There is a real spectrum here. So I'm really keen and intrigued to learn more and more about it. So then I was invited to become part of be a trustee in a charity called ADHD Liberty. And the reason why I was invited was because I was really working in this ADHD space. I was running addiction recovery workshops. And in the UK, I was volunteer for an organisation, a big organisation called Samaritans, which is the biggest organisation. And it was first founded formally to do with suicide. We say we want to live in a world where fewer people die by suicide. So as you know, addiction and suicide really cross over with ADHD. So I'm already in this space, but asked to be a trustee. So now the charity is all about prison reform services, from the police custody suite to going into police stations, into probation services, into the prison services. We want to get people screened as early as possible to see what accommodations that they need. And
That's awesome.
the reason being is because there is nothing available for them. They all get thrown into jail or prison. And did I send you that video about step inside the circle?
You
And
did, yeah. And
yeah,
this is a good point. If I could interrupt for just a moment, I love that you said how broad of a spectrum it is here, because as I'm sitting here listening to your story, which is enthralling to me, by the way, I draw a lot of parallels between things that I myself have gone through or that Cass has gone through. And it's interesting to me to see on different sides of the globe with different presentations, different forms of ADHD, we still have a lot of this similar experience. So, for example, one thing you mentioned was, instead of being the kid who sat and learned and did everything correctly, you were the naughty kid. And I felt like that a lot too growing up. But Cass, I don't know about your experience. How did you feel through your school experience being in that sort of environment that wasn't really conducive to yourself and your learning?
I was the snarky kid.
The snarky kid.
I guess I didn't really grow out of that.
Not necessarily.
But I found that my mind works so fast. I was always the first person done with a test.
Right.
And it wasn't because I got it all wrong. I would ace it. And I just wasn't engaged because everything was so easy.
Right.
So I would mouth off to authority. I would try to get a rise out of people. I wasn't necessarily like the bad kid because I was very strategic
Hmm.
and I was
But then what? Well, then what happens when you become an adult is now you have accountability for yourself and your actions and things that you do, and you could theoretically end up as part of the prison system if
yes,
that doesn't go your way.
you mouth off to the wrong person and it could be a problem. But I'm
Yeah.
actually quite interested in when you're talking about the spectrum and the different types of ADHD. I'm interested in hearing what each type benefits from accommodation wise because I imagine it's different.
Which type are you, Cass?
I actually don't know.
I'm a bit of a combination type. I present more as hyperactive most of the time, but I also do, especially in the evenings, and the meds are worn off and it's couch time. Then I tend to act, sort of more as the inattentive types. I have somewhat of a combination.
I totally agree. And the reason I was asking this is because there are three types from a when you get diagnosed by a psychiatrist, it's either inattentive, impulsive, hyperactive, or combined. Now, I find that the kids that are naughty at school and disruptive were the combined type, but then you've got the inattentive type, which is where there is less disruptive behavior. All the chaos and dysfunction is going on inside your mind, but you're too scared to show up. So you're the kind of quiet child that stays in the classroom and is, they call the forgotten children or the lost children. But they're the ones that don't get picked up in school. And then normally there's a higher percentage of females that are inattentive. So therefore, they're the lost children in school because they're not disruptive and being naughty. They're not picked up as having any kind of issues with learning difficulties and so on. So therefore, it gets lost in the system until they get to their 20s. And this is when females are particularly picked up. There are combined females as well. But when we go into the deeper types, and this is what people don't really talk about, is there is a leading psychiatrist called Dr. Daniel Amen. He's based in the US, and he talks about 7 types on top of this, which is one is the combined type, which is what we described earlier on, inattentive. Then we've got these different types, which is to do with over-focused. So what it means is that normally with the ADHD brain, we've got low blood flow and low concentration and focus in the front part of our brain. But when you've got over-focused, that means another part of the brain is really active, which means it's really stuck on obsessive thoughts, compulsive behaviors, OCD, and just and it can trickle down. Then you've got other parts called temporal lobes. Then you've got a part called the limbic, which is more like a sad, low mood disorder kind of ADHD. Then we got to one called the ring of fire, and we can talk about medications and how these different medications impact these different types of brains as well. Because one type of ADHD medication, one stimulant, one amphetamine, can work for the combined type, but have the adverse effects with the ring of fire or over focused. It makes the person actually suicidal.
Oh, wow.
So again, it's not one size fits all for this type. So I agree with you. There are comorbidities that cross over with ADHD traits. Whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, whether it's anything else. So you got to treat the brain differently based on those conditions.
Right. I was we had an episode where we talked a bit about comorbidities, and I was listening to a different ADHD podcast yesterday called ADHD Big Brother, and he was talking about how almost all of the time there's some kind of comorbidity with ADHD, and he referred to it as a side dish. But the cool thing that I thought was, all right, so maybe anxiety is your main course and ADHD is the side dish, but for some people, maybe ADHD is the main course and the anxiety or the depression is the side dish. And it can be really difficult to kind of figure out what's what and what you're working with. Something that everybody's probably tired of hearing me say by now is if you don't know the score or the rules, how can you play the game? You have to know what you're working with in order to know how to work with it, if that makes sense. And that's kind of what Sean was alluding to a moment ago. But you said something else that really caught my attention, which is the Ring of Fire. And outside of the Johnny Cash song, I'm not really familiar with what that is. So I would love to know a little bit more about what you mean by that.
It's essentially, there's different parts of the brain that are really lighting up in a brain scan, which means they're really overactive and they need to calm down. So if we talk about someone having anxious ADHD, it's very, or when you've got low mood disorder with ADHD, what we need to do first of all is calm the brain down. We need to calm it down. Now, if you just had anxiety or depression, you'll be giving like antidepressants, right, which is serotonin. So it's a mood control and it calms you down. So it's very hard to calm a depressed or anxious mind down when you're jacking it up with stimulants, with amphetamine.
Well, yeah.
So, and this is why, again, for me, I work more in a sort of therapeutic stage where I want to work on calming down the nervous system, reducing the anxiety, reducing the depression, so then we can work on the tools and strategies to live with ADHD.
That's awesome, and that makes a ton of sense, and it's great every time I talk to someone who's either in the therapeutic space or the psychiatry space, all comes down to a lot of the same concepts that we're talking about is kind of tailoring that specificness to each person and each presentation and not just doing this blanket one size fits all approach. And I understand that the US is often sort of the leader in media, at least. So a lot of what we hear about it comes from the US. And so I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, Sean, but though you may be, but there tends to be this sort of stigma of, oh, well, he has ADHD. Well, just give him some Adderall and send him back to school. That is almost the blanket approach is like, all right, well, here's a bottle of Adderall, no coping skills, no mechanisms, no anything to deal with the actual realities of it, just some amphetamines and have a good day. I'm curious, is it similar or the same even over in the UK?
Well, think about it, right? Think about it. Psychiatrists are probably one of the only medical professionals that are diagnosing you with something without checking the organ itself. So if you were a heart surgeon, before you went in to do anything with the heart, you would do all scans and blood tests, you do everything, right?
Right.
So the psychiatrist is asking someone a number of questions, and based on the information provided, now, bearing in mind that people can gamify the system if they choose to do so, because there is a black market for medication and so on. And there's other reasons why people want to be diagnosed with ADHD, and then once you are diagnosed, all of a sudden you're being put on these really strong specialist medications, right? So, and then the question is afterwards, what do you do with before you start the medication process? They're checking heart rate, they're checking your blood, they're doing all this stuff. Why is that? Because it could be dangerous to certain people. Now, like I said, if you're focusing on specifically ADHD, you're just focusing on just treating one part of the brain. But there's other parts of the brain that may also have issues,
Right.
whether it's the temporal lobes, the anterior cingulate, whatever it's going to be, they need to be treated differently. So the problem is when you give someone stimulants like Adderall without looking at the other issues, we talk about bipolar, for example, or there's other medical conditions where it has an adverse effect.
Yes. In the comorbidity, there's an echo in the headphones, so I'm tripping over my words a bit. In the comorbidity episode, I was actually talking about just that because I was off of my mood stabilizers and I was off of my antidepressants, and my doctor threw me on a lot of Adderall. I mean, like Adderall dosage for somebody maybe triple my body weight, and it caused psychotic episodes because I wasn't treating that other side of my brain. And I had to go on medical leave from work. It was a whole thing. And I'd never felt so out of control. I knew when I was having these episodes, you are acting irrationally. There is a problem. But I couldn't stop it. And it was scary. So they weaned me off the Adderall. I got back on my mood stabilizers. I got back on my antidepressants, and now I'm on Adderall again, a third of the dose, and everything is good and stable. But without that other aspect of it, you're a hot mess.
Yeah, I mean the challenge is with certain ADHD specialists, they're only focusing on one problem. They're not thinking about everything holistically. This is what I'm saying about we go back to the body and the mind and everything around us, the social aspect, your diet, your exercise, your sleep. There's loads of factors that can contribute to this. When we talk about how it is in the UK, we have a different system. So, you guys are private healthcare, right?
Right.
So we got two pathways. So normally we've got this National Health Service where people go to see their local doctor. They get referred for a diagnosis. At the moment, the waiting list is about 5 years. So
5 years? I
of
thought 8
waiting.
months was bad for me in the States, but
Ooh.
5 years, wow.
So you got to wait 5 years as an adult. It's about 3 years as a child. Now, parents are stressing out because they want children to be diagnosed as quickly as possible so they can go onto a treatment plan, whatever it's going to be. And when you get to the point of being diagnosed, then you may have to wait another year or two to then be treated with medication.
Oh my
So,
Lord.
so then it forces people to go on a pathway to private diagnosis. The challenge is this: there's been big scandals in the UK about this. Is that when you go to a private psychiatrist specialised in ADHD, first of all, you pay a lot of money to get diagnosed, and second of all, you're on the private pathway, which means that you have to pay for your prescription and your medication every month. Now, if you're on the
Oh,
NHS, everything is free. Now, once you're on the private pathway, you cannot jump over back onto the NHS. So
Interesting.
that
again,
is,
it's really costly. It's really stressful. Now, the
Yeah.
private psychiatrists, they may be incentivized by money, right?
Yeah.
Because all they're looking for is to get a diagnosis specifically for ADHD. They're not looking for anything else. So we talk about bipolar, autism, all the other comorbidities, even dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, all these other, comorbidities that can show up with ADHD. And they're focusing on that one thing. And that's because they get paid.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's for everyone, but this is what we're seeing.
Yeah.
We see a fair bit of that over here.
Yeah. Considering it's
And
all
the challenge
private.
is we got overdiagnosis, we got overprescribing. We had a real shortage for ADHD medication for 9 months. So people
Yeah.
were losing their crap.
Yeah.
They were going on the black market, they were doing everything,
course.
because all of a sudden they need their medication.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in the middle of going through it with a change in providers and not having medication and having to fall back to backup things. And the theme of this episode was, and we haven't really gotten too much into it yet because I like the conversation we've been having, but kind of talking about self-advocacy and advocating for yourself. So all of these situations that we've just described kind of makes for the perfect storm for not standing up for yourself. So whether you're in the US or in the UK, it's not an easy path to get a credible ADHD diagnosis. So, my personal experience, I was referred by my therapist and I waited about 8 months and I had to come out of pocket about $3,000, probably 25 to 2,700 pounds to get this diagnosis. And the beauty of it is once it was done, it wasn't just a ADHD checkbox. It was a full psychological, neurological workup. So I really found out all of my fucking problems all at once. I got a big stack of paper this big telling me all of my problems. And thankfully, I now was able to kind of move forward, but it was so very difficult to stick with it and stick up for yourself, especially in the midst of the stigma attached to it of people saying, oh, you just want medication or this, or doctors looking at you and saying that. I had a doctor at one point tell me that it wasn't a big deal that I couldn't get my medication for a week because sometimes kids go the whole summer and don't take their ADHD meds. And first of all, we won't even touch on the ethics of a doctor saying that that's okay. But at the same time, ma'am, I'm an adult. I'm not a 12-year-old kid. Like, I have a job. I have a family. People count on me. I can't afford to not have it. And it became very hard for me to make the decision to say, all right, well, I finally have a doctor that I've been comfortable with for a year now. Now I have to go and find somebody else. And I have to have that, I'm not saying this to my own horn, but do that sort of courageous act of saying, you know what, enough is enough. I have to find something different. And I think it's very difficult for people in the face of these struggles to have the courage to stand up for yourself and say, I'm having this problem and I deserve to have it listened to. And I know I can only speak to it a certain amount, but Cass, especially presenting as a woman and running into that in the healthcare industry, also is a whole nother level to this. Sean, you mentioned that females, especially of the inattentive type, aren't often diagnosed to their 20s, and it's another thing I'm not sure you're aware of, but the difficulty in the U.S. of as a woman being taken seriously by the medical field. I won't pretend to know much about this. I'll send it to Cass.
It's interesting because it would always be, are you pregnant?
That's what they asked you?
They will ask that you have any little problem, they assume it's pregnancy. For a while, I'm bi, but for the longest part of my life, I was dating women. So I would tell them, I have a girlfriend. No,
So,
I'm
no.
not pregnant unless I am the Virgin Mary reincarnate.
Right.
I'm not pregnant. And they'd go, Are you
Are
sure?
you sure? Are you sure your girlfriend didn't get you pregnant?
I'm pretty damn sure.
And
And
the other
once you
thing,
pass that aspect,
yeah.
though, they assume, well, when was your last period? Are you menstruating? I'm like, my mood swings are not because of that. And they are just so quick to blame it on the biological differences
Right.
that it takes probably double the time it would take for a doctor to jump to a diagnosis with a man than with a woman, because they have to cross off all of these prejudices. And it
And
is
not to
incredibly
mention, you're
frustrating.
also in extraordinarily good shape. And I people who are not as ripped as you are often get, well, maybe you should just lose a little bit of weight.
Well, remember, I
That
wasn't always
Well,
in
I
good
always think of
shape.
you that way
I
because
That's
since
when we
I've known
met.
you.
I used to be obese, and it would always be that.
It's like, yeah, first, all right, you're too fat, maybe you're pregnant, maybe you're having your cycle, and then maybe we'll think about potentially listening to your problems.
Yeah, exactly. And I know people of different races, which obviously we can't speak to,
Of course.
have even more trouble getting
Yeah.
taken seriously.
What was that,
I'm
Sean?
surprised they didn't mention hormones.
Right.
So in the UK, there's a running joke in the UK now with social media. It's just saying that everyone has ADHD and they've all been diagnosed by TikTok. You know? So and the problem is that you go down this rabbit hole of talking to these experts that have watched a couple of videos, and they're now giving you support and guidance of what you should and should not be doing. Now the problem is that, as amphetamine, this Adderall, stimulants are a very dangerous drug. They're one molecule away from methamphetamine. It shows you how dangerous they can be. And the fact that, you've got people looking on the black market or finding alternative ways to stimulate themselves because they think they've got ADHD and they think they have a certain type, this is what's causing loads of problems. Now, for me, we go back to, I always give all my clients a brain assessment, which is like a 50 question quiz to see what brain type they are, and we work backwards from there, because I believe that everyone is a unique individual. So we have to work with everyone on a case by case basis, and then it's my job to help them discover their gifts, find out what it is they want, find out what it is that they're good at, what they enjoy, and we start working forward with that, because I want to see what their future looks like, because some people are just stuck. And like you said, the inattentive people, they're very quiet, they're very reserved. And, with ADHD, we've got rejection sensitivity. So sometimes we don't want to speak up because we have the fear of someone saying no, because it makes us feel unwanted, unliked, which means
Right.
we're unloved, we're abandoned, and we're not good enough.
Oh, yeah.
Or we have
And
this, or the sense of unfairness, where we have this injustice sensitivity where we're not being treated fairly. So again, our senses just magnify. And so we start feeling, every time we felt an unfair event in our lives, that emotion shows up, or we're trying to protect everyone else.
Right.
So again, we've got all these factors with ADHD attached to it, which makes it even more difficult.
Yeah. That sensitivity to it is it's a good segue to the point that I want to make here, is that fear of hearing no, you know what I mean? And before I do want to talk next after we get here about, your prison reform projects. And I think this is going to lead into this a little bit, but the fear of being told no, or the fear of things not working out, that rejection there, it's something that's even harder for us because it's built into how our brains work with ADHD. And it's very difficult, and I'll acknowledge that I still have difficulties standing up and saying this is what I need to do, or setting this boundary, or making this specific phone call, or looking into this piece of assistance that I need. But what I keep finding is that a lot of our experiences from when we were younger are that rejection, and they stand out in our brains so much more than a lot of times when we get the yes or when things go right, because that negativity sort of sticks with you. And it's very difficult to look back at the evidence to the contrary and say, here's all of the times that things did go well and things did go my way. But now at 33, I'm realizing a lot more in my life that the ones that matter are the yeses, and the things that make a difference in your life to the positive are the times when you did have the courage to stand up and say, you know what, this medication is not working for me, and I need to try something different. And I don't care that my doctor won't listen to me. I'm going to find another doctor. And that's a very difficult thing, that specific scenario, to do at times. But I just want to speak from experience and encourage anybody listening that it is actually worth it at the end of the day. Going through that wait list and saving all of my money and half of my COVID stimulus check, RIP, and using all of that money to spend to get myself this official diagnosis was ultimately worth it in the end. And it set my life down a completely different trajectory than where it was heading at that point. So I wanted to encourage anyone out there listening to stand up for yourself and to ask friends to help you. Look for support, whether it's from the online community of ADHD or other people you know. And I really encourage you to take that scary step, because the worst thing that could happen is exactly what you expected. Somebody says no. But the best thing that could happen is that your life changes for the better in a lot of ways.
I wanted to piggyback real quick on that
Yeah.
by saying that with ADHD, I think a lot of us were, the gifted kid
Yeah.
where, oh, you are so bright, you are so smart, wise beyond your years,
There's
you're gonna shoot
there's that
for
good
the
old
moon.
pattern recognition that we got there, picking up on how things go and guessing the answers.
And then the first time you try something and you don't succeed right away, in your head, you are a failure.
Right.
It doesn't matter how good you are at everything else. You didn't grab something right away and you have to work for it like everyone else. And all of a sudden, you're not gifted anymore in your head. And I just wanted to say, as somebody who had that, somebody I was told in 5th grade, oh, you have the brain of a philosopher. You're going to do great things. And, now I'm delivering for Amazon. It's easy for me to go down that rabbit hole too and forget about all the work I've done.
Right.
And I just want to remind people that, you are worth the work.
Right.
Advocate for yourself, because you are 1000% worth putting that effort in.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue here. So, I wanted to hear a little bit from Sean about this, because I think it'll be a great, inspiring story and a good bit of encouragement. Tell us a little bit more about Samaritans and about the sort of work you're doing within the prison system in the UK for reform, because it goes along with what we've been talking about for letting people know what's out there for them and how they can advocate for themselves.
Okay, just to jump back, because when by ADHD, I'm going to forget it if I don't say it now.
Go for it.
Just what you were saying, Aaron, was basically procrastination. So procrastination is a big thing for us, right? So procrastination, how I describe it, is it's an avoidance strategy, because we are preventing a potential negative consequence. So what it means is that we are scared of some form of fear. So therefore, we just don't do it. So therefore, and fear kills more dreams than failure ever will. So for us, fear is always underneath that. And then going back to you, Cass, about, the perfect child, and all of a sudden she's realized that she's made a mistake or she's failed at something. And I work with a lot of people that call themselves perfectionists. And they ask themselves the question, are you truly seeking perfection, or are you fearing failure? Because there's two separate things. And they pause, and all of a sudden they realize they're not perfectionists no more. They're scared of failing, scared of being judged. They're scared of rejection, or, feeling like they don't matter, or they're not important anymore. So it's really important that we talk about that, because procrastination in particular shows up for all different types of ADHD.
Yeah. I think I just found my new therapist, because that really triggered a lot of things in my brain there, Sean. No, that's awesome. I'll let you get back to it, though, about the Samaritans or whatever your next point was.
But that's why, for me, I always stress it's important when you go see a therapist, they have to have ADHD. They have to know your brain inside out.
Right.
So I live and breathe it. I've had it all my life, late diagnosis, children with ADHD. I study, read, and I'm everything I do is live, breathe, and eat ADHD. So you need to get someone who gets you. So with Samaritans, it's a massive nationwide organisation. So what we do essentially is that we give support to people, especially vulnerable people, that are, we have a 24-hour call round service. So people call for free anywhere around the UK, and especially in prison. So we have a crossover prison as well. So in prisons, normally there's a payphone in the prison, which the prisons record just for any illegal activity. But Samaritans have got their own phone in there. And that's and a lot of them are in the cells now as well, because people need some privacy to have a confidential conversation about the tough times. Because with prisoners, there's a lot of bravado in there, lots of ego. But when they're in that room by themselves in the dark alone, the true person comes out. So we are available. We've got branches all around the UK, and we're all volunteers. Everyone's a volunteer. So we give up our own time to do shifts, whether it's 4 o'clock in the morning till 8 a.m. or through the night, whatever it's going to be. And we also do outreach, which means that we go out and we help support people in public spaces. We also support the police, or if someone's trying to jump off a bridge, or if someone's jumped in front of a train, we're the people that go support the police. So we talk to people about we pull them back from the ledge, or we talk to witnesses that have seen someone jump off a bridge or being run over. We're the team that do all that sort of stuff.
Wow.
That's
Um,
fantastic.
It's amazing to hear, and I'll just give you a little info, Sean. Suicide has touched both Cass and I's lives in huge ways. I've had two nearly immediate family members commit suicide, and one very close friend of mine that was one of my first friends when I moved to the state of Rhode Island. And Cass actually wrote an entire play about her own failed suicide attempt. So this really resonates with the both of us, and I would love to hear, just some examples of ways that you've helped or things that you've done to help those who are struggling with this, and maybe even a word of encouragement for anybody who's kind of thinking it.
well, most of the time people are stuck. There's a lot of loneliness around this, and they feel like, you know, I do a lot of work with men's mental health. So we talk about, especially with men, they got something called an ego. So with men in particular, with women, if they have a problem, they sound it out. They like to talk about it, whether to a friend, family member, whatever. But they use it as a soundboard as well to hear themselves speak, so they can work on solutions. With men, because they have an ego, they want to resolve the problem in their own man cave, and they try to find the solutions themselves. But at some point, they get stuck. There's nowhere else to go, and it becomes more painful. There's the guilt, the blame, and the shame. We have all these factors that come into it as well. And for me, when I talk to people who are at the end, we have many calls that people say, the phone call can start off by saying, I've just taken loads of pills, I'm just about to die. We've got to stand in the call and support them, to give them emotional support. Or I'm just going into the woods, I've got a rope, I'm going to, take action, called self-determination. Yeah. So we have got to give them as much emotional support as possible, and hopefully we can help support them to change their minds. Because in that moment, I always ask them the question, do you really want to end your life, or is it the current situation that you have trouble with? Is that what we need to work on? Because if we can change that, do you still want to end your life? And they pause because we separate it. Because if they can fix this one problem that's going on in life right now, then everything changes for them. Because in that moment, there's a lot of emotional pain. There could be deep-rooted trauma. There could be many issues. And what they see is that they believe that in that moment, dying is less painful than living.
Right.
So we need to convince them that life is worth living. And we need to talk to them about, all the positive things in their life, what they've done in the past, in the present, and what they can look forward to, all these future benefits. And we work really hard to work with the callers to change their mind.
I literally have goosebumps now because of one of the things you said about, if you can solve this problem, do you still want to enjoy life? And it reminded me of this short YouTube documentary that I saw about people who have jumped off of the Golden Gate Bridge and survived. The Golden Gate Bridge is iconic around the world. I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with it, Sean, but it is one of the most popular bridges, and I don't say popular as a good, but one of the most commonly used bridges for suicide attempts, and many people have survived it. And they were interviewing someone, and this is a common thing that every single person who has survived a jump off that bridge has said nearly the exact same thing, is that the immediate second that they jumped and looked down, they realized that every problem they had could be solved.
It was literally that poem from BoJack Horseman with "Before I leaped." Yeah, I should have seen the view from halfway down. I actually have that phrase tattooed on me.
Yeah, because you immediately realize in the face of certain death, all of your problems feel like nothing. It feels like those problems could be solved so easily when you realize the permanent solution is moving forward at hundreds of miles an hour in your face.
And I wanted to ask, because you're somebody who has ADHD, you're somebody on the other side who's helping people, but you've also actually been there yourself. When you're helping all of these people and you're hearing their stories, how do you keep yourself in an emotional state where you don't become desensitized or where you don't become numb or callous? Like, how do you protect your own emotional well-being?
There's always a reason why we do the things we do, right? There's a reason why you do what you do, right? Because you love it and you're passionate to it. So for me to be an ADHD therapist, for me to do addiction recovery workshops, for me to work in an organization that helps people prevent suicide, it tells you about my past. There's a real connection to that. So for me, I'm passionate about people not living the life that I had to go through, and, had I known about ADHD as a young child, I believe my pathway would have been completely different. I was just lost. I had no guidance, I had no support. And I just kept making the same mistakes over and over again, whether it's just addictive behaviors, disruptive behaviors, relationship breakdowns, issues with money, issues with career and work, focus, concentration, stimulation, all these kind of things. So for me, I've just gone on a mission myself to really help as many people as I can. And it's not only with Samaritans and not only with the charity, but I also had a call with a prisoner this morning. They called me for an hour from prison. He's convicted of murder for 23 years, and the reason why he calls me, he said, I've been assigned to a psychologist. She's 22 years old. She just finished university. She's got no life skills. I can speak to you. You're an older person. You're mature. You know how my brain works. You can talk to me about all this kind of stuff, and you can't learn to swim by reading a book. You need to have life experiences. You need to live it and breathe it. And this is why so many of my clients come to me, because I said, for the first time in my life, I've got someone who understands me. They understand how I think, feel, and behave.
Right.
And it's really strong that you have this connection, you have this trust, you have this non-judgmental, safe environment for them to speak up, and I can really empathize with them.
Yeah.
So, and going back to what you're saying, Cass, is that I, as you can imagine, I also need to decompress. So what I do is when I do like a shift at Samaritans, there's a half-hour drive between there and home. So I put the windows down, I play classical music, and I process it myself. Because in some ways, even with my therapy work, because I do a lot of deep trauma work as well. So some of my sessions are an hour talking therapy, but the deep hypnotherapy sessions, going back to childhood trauma and all the other stuff that goes with that, they're 2-3 hours. So they're really heavy. And in some cases, I don't know if you've seen the film The Green Mile.
Yes.
You've seen the big black guy, John Coffey.
Mm-hmm.
He absorbs people's emotions.
Yeah.
And that's me. I can really take it in and really help them and heal, But for me afterwards, I always go for a long walk in nature, so process it myself.
And to decompress it, yeah.
A
And
great coping mechanism.
Yeah, it's funny that I see this all the time, and this isn't unique to ADHD, but everybody, we kind of end up becoming the help we wish we had when we were younger, So we often turn to the turn of the phrase is, I don't want anybody else to have to feel like I did, So we eventually kind of take all these things on and we have a personal thing with it. And it's why you see, like in several movies, I can't even think of one off the top of my head. You see people struggle in the beginning and then they become the coach in the end, like that's there as a trope because it happens so often in life. And I think to the point of one of the other episodes Cass and I had where we talked about ADHD, quote unquote, superpowers, empathy is one that kept coming up over and over and over again, because you spend your life being made to feel like shit for your brain being the way it is. You eventually get to a point where you say, you know what? Now that I've learned this, I need other people to learn this and feel like they're not alone in it. And that's why I started the ADHD Project. That's why this podcast came about. That's why Sean McNicholas is the best ADHD therapist in the entire UK, as far as I'm concerned, at least. I don't know any others. But, I think that there's a lot to what you said about you need somebody who understands your brain and how your brain works in order to be able to help them with that. And I think that it's amazing, probably mostly thankless work that you're doing, with people who feel hopeless and who feel like, if you're in prison for murder for 20 something years, you probably don't feel like you have very many options. And so having somebody who can at least listen and empathize likely makes all the difference in the world. So, I feel like you're saving lives every day or every phone call with something like that. And it's hugely admirable. And, this is one of the I wouldn't say the first, but it's one of the first episodes where I've been emotionally welling up this whole time thinking about some of these things and having been on both sides of it. So I really appreciate you being here with us and talking, Sean. Cass, any thoughts before I kind of ask Sean for his final words of wisdom for us here and we kind of get started on wrapping things up?
A few, because like you, this is something that I'm very emotionally invested in and personally invested in. And I think if we had more people in the mental health industry who have been there,
right,
who know how their patients are feeling, I think that would be the reform we need.
Yeah.
You'd have the passionate advocacy for reform. You'd have the non-judgmental. You'd have more people wanting to go to therapy because they have someone who gets it. And, we have the suicide hotlines and things like that over here. And as somebody who has called them a few times in my past, you get very trite script-like answers and you don't feel heard. And I think if I had had somebody like you on the other end, as opposed to that person reading a script on a headset, I think things might have gone different for me in my teenage years. And I want to genuinely thank you for everything you're doing.
Yes, thank you very much, Sean. And if you have any closing words of wisdom or parting thoughts that you'd like to share, anything that you'd like to promote, floor is yours for a few minutes here. We'll wrap it on up.
Thank you. For me, we need to first, the approach is to show compassion, love, and care, right? And to remind the individual it's not their fault, and to let them know there are so many possibilities that we can focus on to change and improve your life. We're very sensitive creatures, and going back to you both being emotional, and we're people pleasers, so we want to help people all the time, and we're also oversharers. So once we know information, we want to share it to the world. So this is just our nature. So for me, it's about just letting the audience know that, there is a world of possibility out there, and it's about just fight. And I always say to people as well, and I learned this myself, is that to learn more about yourself, we need to become the expert. We need to know more than the doctor, the psychiatrist, the teacher, everyone, because whatever you are as a parent or a partner with someone with ADHD or someone that lives with ADHD yourself, we need to become the experts, especially with partners and parents. We can have another episode on this, but they've got to be our frontal lobes. We are the 10-pin bowling ball going down the lane, and they've got to be our bumpers. So we need people around us to support us in what we do. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, you can find me on the website. It's www.adhdtherapy.coach.
All right. And we will put that link in the description as well. Thank you so much, Sean, for being here. Sean McNicholas, everyone. Thank you very much. We will put the link for his website as well as it's on the ADHDproject.com, but we'll also put the link for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, both for the U.S. and for the U.K., if anybody out there is listening. Sean, please do forward us the details for Samaritan so we can put that info in the description there as well.
Yeah, it's on my website.
All right. Well, right there on the website. So please do visit Sean's website. Thank you so much for being here. I've been Aaron.
I have been and continue to be Cass.
This is Fuck the Plan, the ADHD Project podcast. Thank you.